Well, I heard you like some artifacts. Okay, before we get too into this, I want to acknowledge Natlan is great. Genshin 5.0 has brought a number of positive, enjoyable additions to Genshin, and I am enjoying the game a lot. But I'm going to be a little bit negative this video when I don't normally like to be negative in my edited videos, but I feel this is important to say. This artifact selector thing, the transmuter gadget, right? This specific component wherein you can sacrifice 5-star artifacts that are leveled up in order to get these purple bottles, which is called sanctifying Elixir, and then you use them to craft custom artifacts. By all means, on its surface, being able to make custom artifacts should be, you know, really good thing. And it definitely still can be. But the TLDW for this whole video, you can like stop watching after this point if you want, is you should not use this component, right? Don't feed your artifacts into this. And the simple reason for that is because it takes so much XP to get one of these things, and then you need multiple of those things in order to get one custom artifact that might or might not roll well. Like, it gives you an unleveled artifact out that it's not giving you guaranteed value, but you're losing some amount of value putting into it, right? Because artifact XP can be valuable in many ways. And the reason I feel like I have to make this video is because I feel that players that are uninformed about how valuable their artifact XP might be to level up existing artifacts versus throwing it into this thing will end up throwing a ton of artifact XP into here, and they're going to get nothing out of it when they could have gotten some amount of actual value out of it from leveling up their existing level 0 artifacts. And you would think like, oh, but it's just like, it's the high investment thing, right? It's like when you get your builds to a point where you only need really one specific artifact, like it'll make sense. Except like, no, because you still need to grind a crap ton of artifact XP to be able to get the XP to get this thing. And if you're farming a bunch in order to get the XP to dump into the transmuter every patch, then you're also getting a bunch of artifacts with it that you should be keeping and probably leveling up, right? Like my account here, my main account here, is in an eternal state of having a ton of level 0 artifacts. And these aren't all artifacts that are like, oh, I need to level them up ASAP. But they are artifacts like weird ones like this one, which, I don't know, maybe I will want a double crit 4-line ER piece as an off piece eventually. I don't know, right? The point with me showing you all my level 0 artifacts is that, like, I cannot foresee anytime soon where it will make sense for me, despite me being a very highly invested player who could get more value from the artifact selector thing, it doesn't make sense for me to feed leveled artifacts into it versus feeding leveled artifacts into level 0 artifacts to see if these level 0 artifacts become a useful artifact, right? And if you're in a situation where you do have a lot of excess like leveled artifacts that you could dump into the artifact transmuter, you actually are probably underestimating the amount of artifacts you should be leveling up that could be useful for your account. Like, you're underestimating the value of like non-double crit pieces. Like, ER is the best stat in the game, not crit. Point is, this custom artifact thing, I think, should have been most beneficial to the lowest invested of players. Like, we're talking about players that don't log in, you know, daily, that don't farm a crap ton of artifacts. But then you can only actually get these on a recurring, consistent basis if you farm a ton of artifacts anyways. That's the long and short of it. And it's so expensive to put things into this to get one, which is not a good artifact, because like you can only, one of these things that you can get per patch, that'd be a flower or a feather, and you really should not use these on a flower or a feather. And the reason you don't want to use them on a flower or feather is because just being able to choose crit rate, crit damage on your flower and feather is not very good compared to timepiece, goblet, and circlet, wherein the misery of farming these that you have to farm, you know, main stats and good substats, right? So it's much more valuable to save them for one of these other 3 pieces. I really wish miHoYo allowed like the flowers and feathers to be like 3 stats selected instead of 2 stats, since, you know, technically the timepiece, goblet, and circlet all let you select 3 stats, right? One of them is the main stat, 2 are substats. So like, don't use it on flower or feather. Oh yeah, also, it's really dumb. For some reason, you can only choose, if you happen to have stockpiled a bunch of the sanctifying elixir over time, in a given patch, you can only customize 1 set. I don't get why they put that limit. That's really stupid to me. like yeah, it's like this whole system kind of reeks of like, miHoYo really wants to make sure you're still forced to log in and farm artifacts constantly. That's what this system basically feels like to me. Like, it doesn't really address the core problem, which is like where this could have let you have saved your sanity about not having to farm artifacts as much, right? Like, it doesn't. You have to farm artifacts a crap ton still. And by the way, other than the one-time sources for, like, you know, the sigil turn-in Natlan for exploration, or some that you can get, I believe, for like quest completion, the only other recurring source is in the battle pass. You can get one per patch of these, but only in the paid battle pass at level 26, which is really lame. I like Mahoyo, would it have killed you to give free-to-play players one of these in the main battle pass? It's not like, I just it frustrates me, because like I want to emphasize how, like, if an uninformed player just farms their artifacts and, like, you know, very casually, and then dumps artifacts let's say these artifacts I'm not using, I don't know, let's say this artifact is actually a good example of one I'd say some players might think is a bad artifact, right? Because, oh, it's only got 2 crit damage rolls on a crit circlet. That's not a very good circlet. No, this is actually a very good circlet. I am never going to throw this away. If you do something like, you know, sacrifice this into, you know, 30 out of 100 for 1 elixir, it's like, it's so bad, right? For level 20 artifacts, you have to feed like about 7 level 20 artifacts in order to get 2 of these elixirs across 2 patches, which could be 1 level 0 timepiece that might not level up well. And like, it's a level 0 timepiece, so you still need the XP to then level. Like, it's 8 level 20 artifacts worth of XP for 1 piece that might roll well if you're feeding level 20 pieces in. Oh yes, and it's important to mention, if you are going to engage with this, you should actually feed in level 4 artifacts, not level 20 artifacts. It's much more efficient XP-wise to feed level 4 pieces, essentially. I think, again, people might be too aggressive with, like, feeding level 4 artifacts in that could still be good artifacts. Let's pretend this last line on this artifact was energy recharge, right? Wherein this artifact could have crit rate, energy recharge, and HP percent is a very relevant stat. Flat attack is not the most relevant. I would say this artifact has to be leveled up to level 12 before you know if it's actually a good artifact or not. And ultimately, if it's a good artifact, will depend on relative to your other artifacts, relative to your goals of your builds. You know, like a lot of different stats are relevant in the game, right? And this artifact could be one that would have to be leveled up more before you actually know it can be fed in. So it's really stupid that, like, the more you level an artifact, like, to figure out if it's a good artifact, the less value you get to putting it in this. It's really dumb. It's really bad. And again, like, it's so much more valuable to just, like, put existing artifacts, if they level up and don't upgrade like you need, put them into existing level 0 artifacts, and eventually that XP you put into an artifact will eventually, even though you lose a little bit each time, turn into a good artifact. Whereas this is feeding a crap ton of XP with no guaranteed value out of it. It's extremely wasteful, and that like it's so expensive. Like anyone that's played Genshin for a while knows, like, it actually takes quite a lot of XP to level up an artifact from 0 to 20. So being wasteful with your XP can actually really put the progression of your account really, really behind. And that's why this, you know, foddering your leveled up artifacts thing is it's just a scam, honestly. Like, you just probably shouldn't do it. the circumstances that you can conceive of doing it are if you are a player that is, like, you know, the main goal you have in Genshin is just making your Mualani the best possible, and you spend 8 months farming the same artifacts for Mualani, and you basically only care about getting better artifacts for Mualani, even though that's not the best thing to do, because you can, like, you know, spend time farming for other characters that might, you know, make your Mualani, like, farm for your Emily to make your Mualani team stronger is, like, a smarter way to diversify your resources. But the point is, if you're at the point and the way you enjoy the game is just crazy hyper investment, spending many months in the same artifact domain for one character, where you have really specific stats you need, and, you know, you're always comparing the artifacts you get to already really good artifacts, like the chance you get an artifact that's actually an upgrade when you're farming for 6 months straight is really bad. That is a situation where you might wind up with enough extra artifact XP that you can start to use this. But if you're being efficient with your resources and trying to actually, like, you know, progress your account by leveling up a bunch of different characters and get a bunch of different characters built, and notably MiHoYo themselves is trying to incentivize you now with, like, Imaginarium Theater. They have an endgame combat mode that they're being like, hey, you should build more characters rather than fewer characters. If you're building more characters, you'll wind up in a state like my account is, wherein you're just going to have a ton of artifacts that could always use some leveling up to check if they're any good, right? It's so much more valuable for me to use my XP towards leveling existing artifacts to see if these roll well. So unfortunately, I think if you're not buying the battle pass, it's best to just ignore the artifact customizer other than through the one-time rewards that we get through quests or whatever else. They've balanced this in a way you got to be really, really careful with when you use the sanctifying elixirs, essentially. I also think it's worth talking about how, you know, it costs 2 for a timepiece, 4 for a goblet, and 3 for a circlet to make these things. I think some people might lean towards like saving up for a custom goblet, and that might make sense. All right, sure. Let's make my Arlecchino's build, for example, right? So I have a very, very good artifact there, an extremely good artifact there, an extremely good goblet, and a very good circlet. But my timepiece is also pretty good, but this is the main piece that could be improved, right? So if I were to farm for Arlecchino, it could make sense for me in this instance because I already have a good offset goblet to go for a timepiece. And that's how I think you should approach it, right? Don't approach it as, oh, goblets are hard to get, because a circumstance that happens with goblets, particularly the longer you play, you will eventually just get some good goblets. Like, let's look at all my elemental goblets, because I've been playing for like 2.5 years, and not 2.5 years of resin spent, right? But, you know, here's my pyro. I've gotten definitely luckier for pyro goblets, I would say. I have 2 extremely good pyro goblets, and then, you know, that's a more relatable one, and then this one's quite good as well. I don't need pyro goblets, right? So I'm in a circumstance where, because I already have like 2 really good options for pyro goblets, and I'm unlikely to need more than 2 of these goblets at any given time, it would make more sense for me to just stick with these really good goblets I already have, and then, you know, try to get a timepiece that is an onset timepiece that ensures that I can use my offset goblet. I mentioned my brother before. His Navia build, he is using a pretty like low quality, kind of like a goblet like this, a lower quality onset goblet on his Navia, but he has a 40 CV offset geo goblet that he could use if he gets a decent attack percent timepiece on set for his Navia. So it makes more sense to try to get 2 timepieces, which is 2 chances of 2 different artifacts that could roll well, and that let him use an off-piece goblet. You could very feasibly go get unlucky with the upgrade rolls and waste 4 sanctifying elixir, right? Whereas if you use 4 sanctifying elixir for 2 timepieces instead of 1 goblet, you have more of a chance of getting a good artifact out of those sanctifying elixirs if you use them for more artifacts rather than fewer. And the longer you play, the more likely it is you will just end up with decent goblets over time anyways. So I honestly think most of the time circlets and timepieces are going to be the better bet. The most important aspect of circlets, and the reason they may be more valuable, is even if circlets upgrade pretty poorly, because so much of a crit circlet's value is loaded into its main stat, you know, like the crit value of this circlet from my Yaimika, right? So crit value is a shorthand way of evaluating crit damage and crit rate rolls. So crit rate rolls, you do ×2 and then add your crit damage. That's the crit value of an artifact. So the crit value of the main stat of a circlet is 62.2. And then we add on the 16.3 crit damage, right? So the crit value of the circlet, the vast majority of the value of crit on the circlet is the main stat. Because of the fact that circlets have main stat crit, you get a lot of guaranteed value just from the main stat. That makes it much less bad if the substats roll poorly. You really, really need to approach using the sanctifying elixir on a build by build basis, and I would not use it until you get to a point where you're farming for one specific artifact. Because if you're farming for one specific artifact to improve on your build, that's when artifact farming sucks, because it's really hard to get one specific artifact. Like, what I just want to show here is that, like, of every elemental goblet type, I have a good smattering of different relevant stats. Like, I don't have any insane electro goblets, no 40 CV goblets like I had in my pyro goblets. But I also have some pieces that could be leveled up and could roll well too, right? And that's my point with, like, you know, here's all these pieces that I still need to, like, put XP into to see if this Animo goblet is any good. Like it's not just, oh, wow, you were so lucky. It's, no, I've just been playing so long that statistical inevitability happens and I eventually get good goblets. I haven't leveled up many cryo goblets because cryo units are not my preference, and Mihoyo seems to hate them too. Hopefully someday Mahoy will make them better, but, you know, I have a lot of cryo goblets that I potentially need to level up, right? But still, I have one good cryo goblet at least. So my geo goblets are probably the worst of the bunch. In my case, maybe a geo goblet would actually be relevant, but still it would be a little bit silly because I have all those unleveled geo goblets that could roll well enough that it is much more sensible to use towards onset timepieces that enable me to use those geo goblets, depending on how the geo goblets roll, but I have to level them up first. I need to have artifact XP to level them up, which means not using the artifact XP for this thing, right? Like hopefully that makes sense. And it's relatively hard to think of situations where I have such an excess amount of XP that it can make sense. But let me go over to my polearm only account quick, because my polearm only account, I want to explain the context that account is in. Here we are on my polearm only account, and the reason it could make sense to feed leveled artifacts into the artifact transmuter on this account is I only focus on a limited subset of characters. I only use polearm characters, right? Therefore, the subset of units I need to actually equip with equipment with them is lower than a normal account. That results, if you look at my inventory screen, you know, compared to my main account where I had almost like the majority, I would say, of my leveled artifacts were equipped on my main account, 2 characters in some form or another. Whereas on this count, I think probably a good 75% of my artifacts at this point that are leveled to 20 are not equipped to any characters. So if you're in a similar situation, not in that, you know, you are limiting yourself to only one weapon type necessarily, but if you're in a similar situation wherein you hyper focus and hyper invest on a specific subset of units, you're not going to bother. This is kind of what I mentioned earlier, right? You're not going to bother pulling for a new character for 6 months and in favor of just spending 6 months of resin in the whimsy domain to get artifacts that are the best possible on her. Then, okay, you are in a situation where you're probably going to wind up with, you know, artifacts that are very throwawayable. My point is like there's no choice for me to do anything other than hyper invest on this account. That made me wind up with a lot of additional artifact XP that could be foddered into the transmuter, right? It can make sense, but I don't think most people's accounts are very similar to this account, especially with the new context of Imaginarium Theater, wherein Hoyoverse is trying to incentivize you to build more characters rather than hyper investing in fewer, like this account is. If you're building more characters, you are almost assuredly in a situation where you should be leveling up a bunch of existing artifacts, because the more characters you are considering leveling up or might level up and use in the future, the more relevant different stats are for different characters, right? Because you have characters that want defense, characters that want different amounts of ER, characters that want HP, attack, yada, 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 yada. There's a lot of value to leveling your existing artifacts, even artifacts that, you know, you might traditionally not consider to be that good. So I don't know, there's a whole deeper conversation within this video on like how a large amount of the players that are less informed about the relevant stats and like mechanics of the game for as far as like how damage calculation goes, you know, overvaluing crit or whatever. And I don't feel like getting too into that, at least not more than I already have. Feel free to comment if you feel like you want me to try to make a video like that eventually. It'd probably be less rambly than this video, to be clear. I just want to encourage anyone that's watching this video to seriously think it over before you consider dumping artifacts into this thing. Like, I saw people on my Discord server that said they just, as soon as they got this thing, they just immediately dumped a bunch of fed artifacts into it. And I'm willing to bet if I logged into their account and went through their artifacts, they would have been better served leveling up some existing artifacts they had at level 0. Or notably, like if in the context of like if you're being efficient and throwing in level 4 pieces, there's a very good chance you'd be better served by instead of like having to level up pieces level 4 to feed into this thing, you'd be better served by putting it into the strong box, right? Like strong box might be more likely to give you good artifacts than leveling up bad artifacts to level 4 just for the purpose to feed it into the transmuter, because you have to have artifacts that are at least level 4 to feed it into the thing. I think this should have been most beneficial to the least invested players, right? The players of Genshin that log in every few days, the players of Genshin that are least likely to watch this video, right? Because they're not as mentally invested in Genshin enough to, you know, watch YouTube videos very regularly. They just like see people getting jazzed, getting a rare 40 CV, all the crit roll artifact, and they think, oh, I gotta use the artifact transmuter to get those rare artifacts, because how else will I get it? Well, unfortunately, basically nothing has changed for, if you are in that situation, you happen to be watching this video, nothing has changed. You still need to farm a crap ton of artifacts, even if you want to to use this sanctifying elixir thing, other than the sources that are like one time for free, right? From quest completion or sigil turn-in, or the anniversary reward, right? Like that's the way you should consider it if you're a free-to-play player. Just use the one-time ones and really think it over before you need to use it. Use it on the character you love the most to try to get something that is statistically likely to improve your build. I can only assume MiHoYo decided to be as stingy with this resource as they are is because, you know, they really don't want us to be able to avoid farming for builds, right? This could have been a really significant improvement to a problem that many people have with Genshin, and I don't think it does anything to address the problem of like the grindiness of getting good builds in your characters. With that said, I do think it's important to mention that I feel that a lot of people, particularly because so many players in this game don't really care about Abyss. Like my brother doesn't try to clear floor 12 of Abyss. The things he likes about Genshin are, you know, doing story and exploration. He just likes his builds being good enough that it doesn't feel like garbage in Overworld. It is actually not that difficult to get builds being pretty good for Overworld, right? Like you don't need to hyper invest and farm for the rarest artifacts. You don't need to get the perfect double crit goblets for your characters if you don't care about the end game combat of this game. So keep that in mind too. If you're that kind of player, if you just, you know, the things you enjoy about Genshin are not the things that are the end game combat, then you don't need to stress about damage stats that are most relevant for end game combat. And you can mostly just ignore this thing other than the additional freebie. If you don't care about the end game combat, never ever dump XP into that thing, because you, again, would be more better served by just leveling up more characters that you like to, you know, vibe with in Overworld, because you just, you know, even if it's not like that's sensible to DPS Kachina, maybe you just like doing this in Overworld and you want to see more damage from it. Well, you need the artifact XP to do that, Honor. This update has been great. I've been enjoying the region a lot so far, but I do think MiHoYo really fumbled the ball with the implementation on this one, and it kind of just like it kind of makes me envision like Hoyo versus executives being like,
ugh, how dare the player base force us to give them artifact customization. We're gonna pull one over on them to make sure they still have to farm for 10 years. Like, it's like nothing has changed. We still have to farm a ton. I'm not gonna say it's never gonna be beneficial. It is a positive addition to the game if you use it correctly. But I think a lot of players are likely to accidentally waste a lot of resources on it, which is not good. And that could negatively affect some people's experience. So, you know, in my opinion, there should be a method of getting one of these things per patch, if that's the rate they have decided on, right, for free to play, without any XP cost at all. You should not have to dump any leveled artifacts into getting one thing that goes towards one new level 0 artifact that also might not roll well. Like, it's so wasteful XP wise that, like, there should be a way, in my opinion, of getting this without doing this at all. Good job with the rest of Natlan, MiHoYo, but yeah, artifact transmuter kind of poo-poo.